The winter wind carved through the narrow valley like a blade, carrying with it the scent of pine and the distant howl of wolves. 17-year-old Samuel "Sam" Crawford pulled his father's old coat tighter around his shoulders as he stepped onto the porch of their weathered cabin. The town of Millbrook lay a mile below, its handful of oil lamps flickering like dying stars against the vast Montana landscape. Sam had inherited his father's restless spirit, but not his patience. Thomas Crawford was a man of few words and steady hands, a hunter who could track a deer through snow so thick you couldn't see your own feet. But tonight, Thomas was 3 days late, returning from a hunting expedition in the northern mountains, and worry gnawed at Sam's gut like hunger. "Should have been back by now," Sam muttered, his breath forming white clouds in the bitter air. The temperature had dropped below freezing again, and ice crystals clung to the cabin's wooden walls like tiny diamonds. The silence of the mountain night was profound, the kind that made every creak of the house sound like thunder. Sam had grown up in this silence, but tonight it felt different, heavier, as if the very air was holding its breath. It was then he heard it, a cry, thin and desperate, carried on the wind from somewhere deep in the woods behind their cabin. Sam froze, his hand still gripping the porch railing. The sound came again, definitely human, but distorted by distance and cold. A woman's voice, maybe a child's. Someone was in trouble. Sam's mind raced. The nearest neighbor was the Hendersons, but they lived 2 miles east. No one had any business being in those woods at this hour, especially with wolves prowling the area. His father had always warned him about the dangers that lurked beyond the familiar trails, not just wild animals, but the kind of men who preferred darkness to daylight. The cry echoed once more, weaker this time, and Sam made his decision. He grabbed his father's Winchester rifle from its place above the mantel, checked the chamber, and filled his coat pockets with extra ammunition. The oil lamp from the kitchen would provide light, but he'd need to be careful not to let it go out. These woods could swallow a man whole if he wasn't prepared. The moment Sam stepped off his property and into the tree line, the familiar world disappeared behind him. Ancient pines towered overhead, their branches creating a canopy so thick that moonlight barely penetrated to the forest floor. His boots crunched through frozen leaves and patches of old snow as he followed what might have been a deer trail deeper into the wilderness. "Hello?" Sam called out, his voice swallowed by the trees. "Anyone out there? I heard you calling." Only silence answered him back. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, Sam emerged into a small clearing he'd never seen before. In the center stood the skeletal remains of an old cabin, its roof long since collapsed and its walls black with age and weather. But it wasn't the ruined structure that made Sam's blood run cold. It was the fresh horse tracks in the mud around it, and the sound of muffled sobbing coming from inside. Sam raised his rifle and approached slowly, every nerve in his body screaming danger. "Who's in there?" he called out. "I'm armed, and I'm not afraid to use this rifle." The sobbing stopped immediately. "Please," came a small voice from within the ruins. "Please help me. They're coming back." A figure emerged from the shadows inside the cabin, a young woman, maybe 20 years old, with torn clothing and dirt streaked across her face. Her dark hair hung in tangles around her shoulders, and her eyes were wide with terror. "My name is Elena Vasquez," she said, her voice shaking with cold and fear. "I was traveling with my father when we were attacked on the road 2 days ago. They killed my father and brought me here." Sam felt his stomach drop. Bandits weren't uncommon in these parts, but kidnapping was a different kind of evil entirely. "Who's coming back?" Sam asked, keeping his rifle ready. "The men who killed him," Elena said, wrapping her arms around herself. "They said they had business to finish in town, but they promised they'd be back before dawn." As they made their way back through the forest toward his cabin, Sam kept his rifle ready and his senses sharp, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Elena was watching him as much as she was watching the darkness around them. And when they finally reached his cabin, Something in her behavior made him pause. She moved toward the back room where his father kept his hunting supplies without being directed. She seemed to know her way around despite having never been there before. And most disturbing of all, when she spoke again, she used his full name. Samuel Crawford, Elena said, her voice suddenly different, steadier, colder. I think we need to talk about your father. Sam spun around, his hand instinctively moving to his rifle. Elena was no longer the cowering victim. In her place stood a woman with sharp, calculating eyes and a determined expression. I know he's not hunting deer in the northern mountains, Elena continued. I know he hasn't been hunting anything for 3 days. And I know that when he comes back, if he comes back, he's going to have some very difficult questions to answer. Start talking, Sam demanded, and start with the truth this time. Elena walked to the window and looked out at the brightening landscape. My name really is Elena Vasquez, and my father really was killed 3 days ago. But we weren't just travelers. My father was a federal marshal, and we were investigating a counterfeiting operation that's been running out of this valley for nearly 2 years. Sam felt the world tilt beneath his feet. That's impossible. Millbrook barely has 60 people, which makes it perfect, Elena said. The gang has been printing fake currency and using local businesses to distribute it throughout the territory. They print the money in an abandoned mine north of here and distribute it through normal commerce. The general store, the livery stable, even the church collection plates. Sam's mind reeled. What does this have to do with my father? Elena's expression softened with genuine sympathy. Samuel, your father discovered their operation 6 months ago while hunting. They gave him a choice, join them or die. He's been serving as their lookout ever since, watching the mountain passes to make sure no law enforcement gets close. The rifle felt impossibly heavy in Sam's hands. You're lying? The money that's been paying for your food, your supplies, it's all been coming from counterfeit bills. Your father is part of this, Samuel. And 3 days ago, when my father and I got close enough to gather evidence, someone warned the gang we were coming. Before Sam could respond, the sound of approaching horses echoed through the valley below. Elena immediately moved to the window, her body tense with alertness. 3 riders, she reported quietly. Sheriff Morrison and 2 others. They're not riding like men on a friendly visit. Sam joined her at the window and recognized the formation his father had taught him for tracking dangerous prey. They're hunting, Sam whispered. They're hunting me, Elena confirmed. And now they're coming for you too. The horses stopped outside Sam's cabin, and Sheriff Morrison's heavy voice carried through the thin walls. Samuel, open up, son. We need to talk. Elena grabbed Sam's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Whatever happens next, don't admit to anything, don't volunteer information, and whatever you do, don't let them separate us. Sam looked into her eyes and made his choice. Right or wrong, he believed her. Maybe it was the genuine pain he'd seen when she talked about her father's death, or maybe it was the way his own father's recent behavior suddenly made terrible sense. Sam opened the door to find Sheriff Morrison flanked by Bill Henderson and Tom Walsh, their hands resting meaningfully on their sidearms. Morrison stepped uninvited into the cabin, his eyes immediately finding Elena. Morning, Samuel, Morrison said. Heard you might have had some company last night. This wouldn't be Miss Elena Vasquez, would it? Sam felt his heart hammering against his ribs, but Elena's expression remained perfectly composed. I'm afraid I don't understand, Sheriff, Elena said. Why would you be looking for me? Morrison settled into Sam's father's chair as if he owned the place. Seems there was some trouble on the mountain road 3 days back. A federal marshal and his daughter were attacked by bandits. Marshal Eduardo Vasquez was killed, but his daughter escaped on foot. My father was a merchant, Elena said firmly, not a federal marshal. Funny thing about that, miss. We found the marshal's body yesterday morning. Had some interesting items in his saddlebags. Photographs of certain locations in these mountains, samples of currency that experts tell us are counterfeit, and a federal warrant for the arrest of several local citizens. The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop 10 degrees. Henderson and Walsh had positioned themselves to block any escape routes. Morrison stood and walked to the fireplace, studying the family photographs on the mantel. "Your father's a good man, Samuel. Loyal. Understands how things work in a place like this. Knows that sometimes a man has to make difficult choices to protect his family." "Where is my father?" Sam demanded. "Safe," Morrison replied. "For now, but his safety and yours depends on how cooperative you're willing to be." Elena stepped forward. "Are you threatening this boy, Sheriff?" Morrison laughed coldly. "I'm trying to save his life. See, we've got ourselves a situation here. A federal marshal came snooping around our quiet little valley, asking questions, taking pictures, making trouble for honest folks just trying to make a living." He turned back to face them with predatory eyes. "Now, that marshal is dead, and his investigation dies with him. Provided his daughter doesn't try to finish what he started." "You'd have a problem," Elena said quietly. "We'd all have a problem," Morrison corrected, "including young Samuel here, whose father has been helping us keep watch over our business interests for the better part of 6 months. Henderson spoke up, his voice gravelly. "Boy, your daddy discovered our printing operation last fall, could have turned us in, collected a nice reward. Instead, he chose to help protect this community's livelihood." "Counterfeiting isn't protecting the community," Sam said angrily. "When the territorial government imposes taxes we can't afford," Walsh joined in. "When the railroad companies charge rates that make it impossible to get cattle to market. We're not stealing from anyone, son. We're leveling the playing field." Morrison nodded. "Every bill we print gets spent right here in Montana Territory. It helps families put food on the table and roofs over their heads, including yours, Samuel. Where did you think that money was coming from?" Sam felt overwhelmed by the enormity of what he was learning. His father, the man who'd taught him about honor, had been part of a criminal conspiracy for months. "The question now," Morrison continued, "is what we do about Miss Vasquez here. She's got information that could hurt a lot of good people. But she's also young, and maybe not entirely committed to her father's crusade." Morrison walked over to Eleanor. "You can try to finish what your daddy started, in which case you'll end up just as dead as he is. Or you can take some money and forget you ever heard of Millbrook, Montana." Elena looked at Sam, and he saw something in her eyes. A message, maybe, or a warning. "How much money?" Morrison smiled. $500. Enough to get you back to Santa Fe and set up a nice new life." "And Samuel?" Elena asked. "Samuel goes back to his normal life. His father comes home from his hunting trip. Everyone pretends this conversation never happened." Elena appeared to consider this. "I'll need to see the money first." Morrison nodded to Henderson. "Ride back to town and get the money from the safe. 500 in mixed bills." As Henderson headed for the door, Elena caught Sam's eye and mouthed a single word: "Trust." The wait felt endless, but finally Henderson returned with a leather satchel. $500, he said, tossing it onto the kitchen table. Elena moved toward the table, and Morrison gestured for her to count it. As she opened the satchel and began examining the bills, she paused. "This is counterfeit money," she said matter-of-factly. Morrison chuckled. "Best quality counterfeit you'll ever see. Spends just like the real thing." Elena continued counting, but Sam noticed her free hand had moved closer to a skinning knife on the counter. He tried to position himself where he could reach his rifle, but Morrison was watching too closely. 500, Elena finished. "It's all here." "Excellent," Morrison said, standing. "Now, Miss Vasquez, you take this money, leave Montana Territory immediately, and never speak of what happened here." Elena picked up the satchel, weighing it. "And if I refuse?" Morrison's hand moved to his gun. "Then you don't leave at all." Elena looked at the money, then at Sam. When she spoke, her voice was clear and determined. "Sheriff Morrison, there's something you should know about this money. It's evidence. Before Morrison could react, Elena threw the bills into the air while grabbing the skinning knife and diving behind the kitchen table. Sam lunged for his rifle as counterfeit money filled the cabin like confetti. "Take them!" Morrison shouted, drawing his gun. But the floating bills created confusion. Walsh fired first, splintering the table where Elena had taken cover. Sam rolled behind his father's chair with the rifle, working the lever action and firing at Henderson. The shot went wide, but forced Henderson to dive for cover. Elena moved with trained precision, using furniture as cover while throwing knives with deadly accuracy. One blade caught Walsh in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his gun across the floor. "She's a federal agent," Morrison realized, firing rapidly. "The girl's a goddamn federal agent." Sam's second shot caught Henderson in the leg, dropping him. But Morrison was advancing on Elena's position with deadly intent, and Sam realized she was trapped. "Elena!" Sam shouted, standing to draw Morrison's fire. The sheriff's bullet whizzed past Sam's ear, but it gave Elena the opening she needed. She emerged from cover with fluid grace, a second knife in her hand, and threw it with practiced precision. The blade took Morrison in the chest. He staggered backward and collapsed against the fireplace. The silence that followed was deafening. Sam stood amid the chaos of his destroyed cabin, surrounded by counterfeit money and wounded men, trying to process what had just happened. Elena checked each of the three men to ensure they were no longer a threat, then looked at Sam with exhaustion and sadness in her eyes. "Are you hurt?" she asked. "I don't think so," Sam replied shakily. "Elena, who are you really?" "My father trained me from the time I could hold a knife," Elena explained. "After my mother died, he couldn't bear to leave me behind when he traveled on assignment. So he taught me to protect myself, to read people, to survive." Morrison coughed weakly from his position by the fireplace. Won't matter," he gasped. "Operation's too big, too many people involved. You'll never get them all." Elena knelt beside the dying sheriff. "Maybe not, but I'll get enough. Your printing operation, your distribution network, your list of collaborators, it's all going to come to light." She stood and looked at Sam with compassionate eyes. "Including your father's involvement." Sam nodded, accepting the inevitable. "What happens to him?" "That depends on him," Elena said. "If he cooperates, if he helps us round up the rest of the operation, the federal prosecutor might be willing to make a deal. Some jail time, but not decades." "And if he doesn't?" Eleanor's expression was grim. 20 years in federal prison minimum." Sam looked around the cabin that had been his home for 17 years, now destroyed by gunfire and chaos. His father was a criminal. His community was built on lies, and the girl he'd tried to rescue had ended up saving his life. "What do we do now?" Sam asked. Eleanor began collecting the scattered counterfeit money. "Now we ride to the nearest town with a telegraph office. I need to contact my father's superior in Denver and request backup. This operation is finished, but cleaning up the mess will take months." She paused and looked at Sam seriously. "Samuel Crawford, you saved my life tonight. You chose to do the right thing, even when it meant betraying people you'd trusted. That takes real courage." Sam felt overwhelmed by everything that had changed in 12 hours. "I don't feel very courageous." Eleanor smiled warmly. "Courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right, even when you're terrified." As they prepared to leave the cabin, Sam took one last look around the place where he'd grown up. His childhood was over, he realized. Whatever happened next, whether his father went to prison, whether the community forgave him, whether he had any future in Millbrook, he was no longer the naive boy who'd heard a cry in the darkness. The sun was fully up now, casting golden light through the bullet-shattered windows. In the distance, smoke rose from Millbrook's chimneys, where people were starting their day, with no idea their world was about to change forever. "Eleanor," Sam said as they mounted their horses, "when this is all over, when the trials are finished, what happens to a place like Millbrook?" She considered the question seriously. "Towns survive, Samuel. People adapt. The honest folks, and there are always more honest than criminals, they'll rebuild. They'll find legal ways to make a living. It won't be easy, but it'll be real." Sam nodded, accepting that uncertainty was part of growing up. As they rode toward the telegraph office in Cedar Falls, he realized that somewhere between hearing that first cry and helping bring justice to his valley, he'd discovered something important about himself. He was Thomas Crawford's son, but he didn't have to make his father's choices. He was part of the Millbrook community, but he didn't have to accept their compromises with corruption. He was 17 years old and largely alone in the world, but he had the strength to do what was right even when it cost him everything familiar. The cry he'd heard at midnight had led him into the dark woods, just as the story would later recount. What he'd found there, the truth about his community, his father and himself, had indeed shaken the town. 3 months later, testifying in federal court, Sam would learn that Eleanor had been right about something else. The story of a hunter's boy who chose justice over comfort would echo through generations of the American West, not as a legend of gunfights and glory, but as a quieter tale of a young man who learned that sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is simply refuse to look away when someone cries for help in the darkness, even when answering that cry costs you everything you thought you knew about home.